What a week in politics it's been. I'm going straight to my next guest. Very welcome, Portia Berry-Kilby, political commentator. Portia, hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very, very well. I'm very well. And what a week in politics, hey? It feels like every week's what a week in politics, but my goodness, own goal by Boris Johnson. He's now paying the price in the polls, isn't he?
That is very true. No, I mean, I guess it is worth noting there was one poll today which showed Boris paying the price. But no, it does speak volumes. And I think especially for the new intake of MPs, it's kind of the first time since they've joined the halls of Westminster that this has been facing them, that they've taken a slump in the polls and the future isn't looking too bright.
Now, if you're I was a marginal seat MP, you get nervous when the polls turn against you. But Boris Johnson... He got elected leader not because his MPs love him. I know that. I was in that leadership campaign. I was supporting one of his competitors at the time, and the minute we lost the local elections, I think it was, that took place in the middle of that leadership campaign, everyone swung behind Boris Johnson because the polls said we would have done a lot better with him. If he stays consistently behind the polls, how strong and reliable are his parliamentary colleagues? Will they stick with him, or will they have the time-honoured Conservative practice of looking to ditch him?
It's interesting. I think the new intake of MPs care, obviously, as any MP would, about their re-election. Is that really independent of Boris? Can Boris assuage the situation? Obviously, he could do more. Everyone's kind of lambasted him for not apologising soon enough, or indeed at all. I think MPs really will just cave to their constituents. And my hope is that following this, they will cave to the social pressure from their constituents, that they'll see the polls and think, okay, my personal life does have to be a bit more beyond reproach. And that will be the bigger takeaway than anything tied to Boris Johnson.
So what about second jobs? I mean, I never had time for a second job because I was in a marginal seat. And I'm kind of not sure what to make of it, because I have actually no problem with... I mean, we've had a whole nation on furlough and everyone was out doing second jobs whilst getting paid by the government. And I haven't heard anyone say how shocking that was. But hey, I mean, second jobs, it's a hard circle to square, isn't it?
It's true. And what I find fascinating about second job argument, Nick, is that people always criticise MPs if they're career politicians, but then they'll go into politics having had a very different career beforehand, and naturally they want to maintain some of that, and then they get criticised for having this outside work, but then naturally the second job gives them more experience, gets their eyes open to another way of life, and gives them more professional expertise to bring to the halls of Westminster.
Do you think part of the problem is, and I've just had one caller earlier basically sounding off about how awful MPs are and how lazy, etc. Is part of the problem. Unless you have personal experience of an MP, you might have had a problem that they helped you with or weren't able to help you with, that people don't really know what they do.
I mean, yes, I suppose so. It is curious. I think to some people it's like MPs, they're these kind of people who parade around, get to cut ribbons and say a few things in the halls. But it's like, what do they do? Does that mean that they shouldn't have a second job? I don't really think so. And you'll also speak to some people who think, oh, they're horrifically overpaid. But for many of the people, it isn't that much. 82,000 is a lot more than most people.
Well, like a head teacher of a sort of pretty average school can average, I could probably get slated for that remark, but an average school will earn £100,000 a year.
And have a very peaceful life by comparison.
And have lots of holidays. And we don't have a proper... He might have a second job, or she might have a second job in their holiday for all we know. But
they get to stay at home with their family. They don't have to uproot, go down on the train for 4 days. Yeah, I think having a second job makes it more feasible, attracts kind of a better caliber of person to to give up a lot of hours of their life, as you did yourself, Nick.
Well, I mean, this is going to sound a bit self-serving, but I don't think a week went by, even in recess, except when I was on holiday, when I didn't do 70 hours. And there was some ribbon cutting in that. Okay, I totally get that, and that doesn't look very hard to people. But I suppose the narrative is that we can judge MPs on their voting record. And we've had callers who are very upset when they've haven't voted or haven't done something perfectly right, and they should take it out or support their MP when that time comes. But I think the lack of understanding of what goes on in a constituency, if you've got a good MP, and I think this is the problem, some MPs and some seats, like all professions, they will have very lazy, not very active MPs. They will. But there's this hunger to just cast every single one of them in the same light. And not understanding what goes on in a constituency, the cases that people deal with are just phenomenal. That, to me, it'll never happen, but I think we need a PR campaign for MPs so people can actually make a judgment based on fact and not tabloid.
Do you mean more compassion for the members of Parliament?
Well, I think compassion might be too much, but they're also their own worst enemy, aren't they?
I mean, to some extent. I think it's also people go to an MP kind of as the last resort.
Yeah.
If you don't go to them when things are going well, you go to them when things aren't. Yeah. And inevitably they won't be able to solve every problem. And I think to some extent that's why they get a bad rap, because they obviously can't deliver. There's no pleasing everyone. And then it suddenly moves from the political to the personal. And it's very easy to criticise someone's personal life because no one is perfect.
So Boris Johnson, right, he's going to come back to Parliament. They've been away for a few days. What can we expect from him in the run-up to Christmas now? Is it going to be more of this COP nonsense that we've had shoved down our throat, or is he actually going to try and do things like levelling up?
Well, I think COP is a bit of a cop-out if the policy direction all heads that direction. I think my bigger concern is all of the focus will turn towards the second year of lockdown, kind of all under the guise of protecting the NHS, but then you obviously have the vaccine mandate issue. I think that honestly should stir up a lot more attention than it currently does. And looking at the winter, looking at Christmas, will there be a Christmas? Not to scaremonger, but simply to speak realistically, especially looking internationally when they're facing other lockdowns for the unvaccinated. And how will Boris rise that wave?
There was a hint yesterday that I think he was talking about, figures might have dropped down of infections, but we need to be very alert. I'm still very worried. I am having a sense of doom that he is going to try and bring in some more restrictions. His plan B, is it? I've lost track with the number of plans, honestly.
Y or Z.
But he's probably looking across Europe, seeing what's happening there when perhaps he should be focusing more on what's happening here. But I just get the distinct, uncomfortable feeling that because the NHS is in such a mess post-lockdown, principally because the NHS locked down, that they're going to blame COVID, despite all these new drugs we've got coming out that are apparently going to be very helpful and going to save lives. They're going to use COVID as a reason to try and lock us down to save the NHS. Am I being alarmist there, or do you sense in the political waves there is a movement building to bang us all up again, however lightly? Plan B, C, D, or goodness knows what?
I think there is a movement in that regard, which is concerning, especially over the whole booster jab saga and whether you'll need a booster jab to therefore travel abroad as well. And it is like COVID became the cop-out now. There's a failing NHS. It needs more funding. It's been underfunded. There's backlog and wait.
How much more money can we give them? I mean,
give to it. I know. And all the while giving more money, but blaming it on COVID. And that's why we're in the situation we're in. And it's just going to be a constant repetitive cycle of blaming COVID, locking down. Meanwhile, is the NHS really getting any further ahead? Well, probably not.
If there was politically, to my mind, I don't think he could stand another lockdown. I think actually, look, we're not going to do what the Dutch do. We don't go out and riot, or the French. We're not out there doing that. But I actually,
not yet, Nick. Not yet.
Yeah, but I actually don't think it's in us to do that. I really don't. Because I think that there would be a quiet rebellion on this of basically not compliance, and they can't make criminals of us all, and that is where I'm sensing it will go. And he's going to end up. Should we expect over the next week or two, maybe 3 weeks? No, next week or two, I think we're going to have the scientists on one side once again wanting to lock us up, and Boris Johnson eventually cracking under pressure against his own instincts.
I think the politically savvy thing for Boris would perhaps be to heavily encourage greater measures, but not actually compel people. Because ultimately, if, to be a very London-centric view, not from London, but here I am, you look on the tube and face masks are required, but it's kind of spot the tourist by spotting the person wearing
I agree. Yeah, I was noticing that today. Yeah,
embarrassing to introduce new policy when it's not being enforced, and people just will not and haven't been complying.
Is Rishi Sunak, who basically, I think Rishi Sunak down, we've had apology after apology, or sort of pretty good. Actually, no, I'm being unkind. He kind of said the government really got it wrong on the scandal of MPs' expenses. You got Steve Barclay, the chief cabinet office minister. He was basically saying the same thing. Boris hasn't really apologised. Is this Rishi Sunak positioning himself? And do we really think that if Boris continues to lose his appeal in the polls, that Rishi is starting to do a Michael Portillo, as I call it, get the phone lines put in place, ready to start a campaign? It seems a bit speculative to me to do that, but I can't understand why he and everyone else is apologising, but not the Prime Minister.
I think, to be very frank, anyone would be a fool to launch a leadership campaign whilst COVID is still with us. It's going to be a bumpy ride regardless, and I think COVID is going to just get more and more divisive, especially as compliance dwindles, but people are still alarmed, especially in some demographics. So is Rishi launching a campaign? Maybe sowing the seeds, but I don't expect anything to transpire anytime soon. I
think the Conservative Party would make a huge mistake, though, if you started seeing Liz Truss on manoeuvres, Rishi Sunak on manoeuvres in this. Well, we may have the COVID crisis, but we've got a huge economic crisis coming up soon and a cost of living crisis. I think that on top of the sleaze scandal would effectively be people saying this is just navel gazing by this party. But where does it leave Keir Starmer? He's been off our screens pretty much for 2 weeks, and yet he's finally got into the lead in the polls. Is there anything is there a connection between the two?
It's very tricky to be in opposition and poke the finger about sleaze scandals, because then it can all too quickly turn around and be pointed at you and your politicians. I think obviously Keir would be good to increase pressure, but always at the risk of unearthing things that not too savoury about his own side. So it definitely seems a tactful move of playing it out and not being too vocal, lest it turn on him.
Yeah, so he could be being very clever then. Just stay out of it, let them shoot themselves.
Which, to be fair, is kind of what we've seen from Keir consistently. He's not too vocal on anything. And maybe he has been waiting just for the Conservative Party to implode. It can't obviously go on forever. They've had a good run. And is it really just a matter of time? Okay,
final one for you, because it's got us talking here on Talk Radio tonight. I cannot believe how on the scandal of the highest number of people, daily record of people coming across the channel, 1,000 I think it was on Thursday, 22,000 so far this year, get to this country, claim asylum, nothing, and basically taking back control of our borders is looking a joke. And yet, in a nutshell, we are now, and the media, blaming the French. Why are we not saying, hang on, government, you promised to take back control. We've been out of Europe for a year now. Why are the government not getting the flak for this?
Well, granted, the government needs to take control, but I think it's also very nice and easy to blame the French, and probably rightly so. The French should be doing more. They should uphold their own end of the bargain. But
if I was in France, I'd go, why? And I didn't make the promise to take. It wasn't the Macron who made the promise to take back control. It was Boris, and they haven't done it. And apart from being convenient, what I can't do is, why are the British public seemingly cross with the French and not cross with the government that promised them to take back control? I mean, it's brilliant politics, but how are they getting away with it?
It's also a centuries-old tradition of blaming the French, rightly or wrongly. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Perhaps that is the unifying political factor, that the French can always be thrown under the bus, and perhaps rightly so.
Well, I think we might have to differ on that, because I know the reason I voted for Brexit was I was fed up with British politicians being able to blame Europe when the UK politicians didn't deliver on their promises. I thought now they'd have to take the rap for everything, but it seems I'm out on my own. Portia Berry-Kilby, political commentator, thank you very much for joining us for